Welcome to the Open to Hope Show. I'm your host, Dr. Gloria Horsley, with my co-host,
Dr. Heidi Horsley.
This show is brought to you by the Open to Hope Foundation as well as the Compassionate Friends. Well, I know that many people that are watching this have experienced a sudden death, or you know somebody who has. And sudden death is really traumatic, and trying to regain balance after can be extremely difficult. But we're going to introduce you to three fantastic men today who've had some really terrific sudden loss. We are going to have them tell their own story, tell you about it, and also how you can find hope.
Yeah, Mom, I'm interested in the show because, you know, when Scott died, it was sudden, and it was traumatic, and he and Matthew, my cousin, were driving and got in a horrible car accident and died immediately. And there is such a, it's like when you've had a sudden loss, you're not only dealing with the loss, but you're trying to wrap your arms around the trauma of it, of the suddenness of it. Mm-hmm. And so, yes, these three men that we are going to have on today, these three guys, will talk to us about how they did regain balance and how they did end up taking their journey and finding hope again. Mm-hmm. And the three men that we're going to have on today are Dr. Neal Raisman, who has written the book Standing on One Foot. Mm-hmm. And he was also on a webinar with us recently that people can listen to if they go to opentohope.com. And we are also going to talk to Steven Francesco, who is the founder of Do Not Harm Network. And his book is called Overmedicated and Undertreated. And lastly, we are going to talk with Rob Goor, and he wrote the book Dear Andrew. And they have all lost sons at different ages.
Absolutely. Well, welcome you three.
Hello, gentlemen.
Nice to be here.
It's great to have you on. And by the way, I'll say you all wrote wonderful books.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
From a whole different perspective and great books to read. Well, why don't we start out with you, Rob? Tell us a little bit about
Neal?
you.
Dr. Neal?
Excuse me, Dr. Neal.
Dr. Neal Raisman.
Rob's on the other end. Okay, Dr. Neal. And Dr. Neal was president of Briarcliff College at one time, right? Which was in my old neighborhood. So tell us a little bit about Isaac.
Well, Isaac was 26 years old, living on the east side of Manhattan. He worked in Manhattan. He was hitting the prime of his life. Everything was seeming to go positively for him and perfectly. He was tops in his business. And one day he woke up with a terrible headache. Mm-hmm. And he just wouldn't go away. And he called up his mother, and his mother thought it was the flu. So she told him to take some aspirin, get plenty of rest. He listened to her, but then at 4:18 he called her again and said, "This headache is just not going away.
Wow.
I don't know what to do." And he sounded a little bit scared, and I imagine he was. Mm-hmm. Soon after that, we believe, he died of meningitis B. Mm-hmm. He had shots for all the other meningitises, so it had to have been B because the vaccine wasn't invented yet, and now is available.
And which is one of the things that you're interested in having people know, right?
Yes.
Your story was amazing because you really took us on the journey. And what's interesting to me is, I mean, here Isaac is very good looking, I have to say, 26 years old, physically fit, bodybuilder, in the prime of his life, and you just wouldn't expect that he could get, you know, sick and die that fast.
No. Well, you never expect that your son is going to die, as I'm sure all three of us can attest to. Mm-hmm. He was in perfect health.
Yeah.
He used to work out every single day. Mm-hmm. He watched what he ate. Mm-hmm. He took very good care of himself, but meningitis is a killer.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's just no way around it. It got him, and it got him quickly.
Right.
Within a matter of 20 hours.
Wow.
Well, there's some things about this I want to get back to you about after we hear about the other two guys, because there's some commonalities here we want to talk about. Steve, do you want to tell us a little bit about your son?
My son had a history of psychiatric problems, had been taking medication for 8-9 years, constantly rotating diagnoses and drugs. And in fact, his last 6 months, it turns out, were his best. Mm-hmm. We had changed his medications, we had changed his school, we'd gone to alternative therapies, and it was absolutely the best 6 months of his life. He was becoming a solid citizen. And then one Friday night, he just was lethargic, really very lethargic, and not like you. I thought it was the flu.
Yeah.
And he wasn't complaining, and so he was sitting with my daughter and myself watching television. And he just laid there like a lump. And on Saturday, he was even more lethargic. And I was worried. And about 4 o'clock Sunday morning, now we're talking now 36 hours later, more or less, I heard him in the bathroom. And he had gone in to do his business, and he missed the toilet. And I saw him walking rigid, very, very rigid. And I said, you know, we got to give you a shower and let's get you straightened out. And he said, no, I want to go. So we went back to bed. I checked in at him at 7, and he was like unconscious.
Wow.
In a stupor, in another planet. So I called the emergency medical people. They came by right away. By 7:30, he was in the emergency room, and he was having problem breathing, terrible problems breathing. He was turning blue, and I had no idea what was going on, none whatsoever. And it turns out that after a period of time, and without going into too much detail, he went into a coma, from which he never recovered. And it's all in a matter of 36 hours. And it turns out it was a cumulative effect of a certain type of drug that he had been grossly overprescribed, overmedicated. He was getting 50% more of this drug per day than the allowable drug for an adult.
Wow, that's
But the doctors can do that under the concept of off-label prescribing. They have complete free reign. So he ended up going into the coma, which he never recovered. And eventually, about 5 days after he went into the coma, and he was diagnosed as brain dead, and then we just cut off the respirator.
Wow.
Wow, yeah. And again, we want to get back to you and talk a little bit more about some of the things that you've done as a result of that. And how about you, Rob? Can you talk about Andrew a little bit?
Yes, Andrew was 8 years old, and I was. It was a Thursday. It was May 19th. I went to in 1988. I went to pick him up. I was separated in the last stages of a divorce from my now ex-wife. And I was going to pick him up for my Thursday visitation. And I had just arrived when his playmate pushed him on a wagon into the street. And he was hit. And I could see it developing. I could see the car coming, and I could see him drifting into the street. And there was nothing I could do, although it was years before I could accept that. And he was killed instantly, and the vision of that just kept recurring. It was there was an obsessive repetition in my mind of that whole scenario.
Well, you know what comes up for me when I hear this, Rob, is, I mean, I'm a bereaved sibling, I'm not a bereaved parent, but I hear over and over from parents, regardless of how their kids died, we wish we could have done something. We felt like we should have done something. And when my brother died, I've only told my mom this story once, but when my brother died, my mother called me right after he died. And he died in a car accident, and he wasn't with her. And she said to me, "Heidi, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And I said, well, she was crying, and I said, "Why are you apologizing?" She said, "I'm sorry I didn't save him." And that was so strange for me as a sibling, because I thought, well, we couldn't have done anything. She said, "Yeah, but I should have done something. I was his mother." So I'm wondering if that resonates with all of you.
Oh, yeah.
With the sudden loss, I mean, being a parent.
Actually, I've never met a bereaved parent who did not feel some responsibility or some loss that they could not, that they could not help.
The thing about being a parent, putting tragedy aside,
Yeah.
you've never known guilt until you've had children. I mean, you're always worried.
That's true.
You're always worried.
Yeah.
But in these circumstances, it's 1,000 times worse. And there's residual effects that continue. Each day they may diminish a little bit, but they really do stay with you.
Yeah, it's, my wife felt a great deal of guilt because she had talked to him on the phone.
Yeah.
I felt a good deal of guilt as well, but I was so overwhelmed by having I was the one who found his body.
Yes.
Wow.
And I was so overwhelmed by that I was numb. But what I've learned over the period of time since his death is that we're not Superman.
Right.
We can't do anything about it. If
Yeah.
fate is going to step in, fate is going to step in. We do the very best we can, and if we feel we've done the very best we can for our children, then we have got to realize that we cannot control what happens. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no way we could control meningitis.
Exactly.
You know, but a doctor told you should have taken her to the
That's
hospital,
true.
right?
That's true.
I was shocked when I read that.
I was too. That was upsetting to me that someone would say
Yeah,
that.
one doctor that we went to, when I thought I was doing well, and my daughter Shayna and my wife Eileen realized I was not doing well. I had dropped into administrative mode, which means block everything
Becoming
out.
overly competent. That's what
Oh,
I
yeah.
found myself. Did you guys get overly competent at work or whatever when you got there?
Well, you know, you're dealing with all these emotions, and it's in fact really good to throw yourself into a project because it puts you in a bubble.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with being
But you
in a
get
bubble.
so competent. I worked at
Yeah.
a hospital and consulted with people in automobile accidents and whatever, and I was like so competent it was scary when I think about it. Till I cracked up.
I have to say, I didn't find that bubble. I stayed immersed in it, and it was a number of weeks before I could go back to work. But and when I did, I just stared out the window for a few more weeks. But then, as I got into work, I could work, but I also found some commonality with what I was doing and things I had done with Andrew in his last days. And that may have been what enabled me to do it. But I was lucky because I had not only supportive friends, I had very supportive colleagues at work who were able to hear when I was having a hard time, when I was feeling
That
pain.
is lucky for a guy because I
And-
don't think that
Yeah.
happens
I
a
agree.
lot for guys.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
they would say, "Oh, you know, that's really horrible," and because I could be present, and because Andrew was welcome in all of my circles, I could have those feelings and then go on.
That's interesting. You were a scientist and you were in robotics at General Motors, right?
That's right. Well,
and I wouldn't think of people as being in robotics and a scientist. It's
Yeah.
interesting. So you found I myself worked at a hospital and I didn't find people were unbelievably awful
Yeah.
at a hospital.
Yeah, it's interesting.
I mean, there was a woman there who her expertise was on bone taps for marrow for kids that were dying of cancer. And I walked in and I said, "Oh, I'm so glad to see you." And she turned around and walked off.
Wow.
You know, it was just like really.
She couldn't deal with it.
No, she
Which is
couldn't deal
interesting.
with it.
Yeah.
In a medical setting, they don't want people to die. I mean, I guess.
And Neal,
Yeah.
did you feel like you had support from
We had
friends
a great
and colleagues?
deal of support. I was very fortunate.
Yeah.
Being Jewish, we had one day of sitting Shiva, which means sitting in mourning.
Yeah.
Usually it's 7 days, but because the Jewish High Holy Day was starting the day after his burial, we really had very short time. But after that, all the people from the college came out, and the family was very supportive. We're very lucky because that doesn't always happen.
Right.
However, you were pretty mad at God, as I remember from your book.
No holds barred there.
No, there were no holds barred at all.
If anyone out there
I,
is angry at God, get Neal's book and you'll feel so good.
yeah, I was very angry. We were quite religious
Yeah.
for a very long time, and then we went to services on Rosh Hashanah,
Yeah.
and all the prayers were praising God. And I kept thinking to myself, how in the world can you praise God, who is a child killer? And I just said, no, this is not going to work. And the other thing is, everybody was so happy to see each other. You know, with Happy New Year's, it's so good to
Yes.
see you. They hadn't seen each other for a long time. We just couldn't stand it. I tried to read Kushner's book, When Bad Things Happen to
Yes.
Good People. And I had to make an assumption that I was a good person, and I couldn't necessarily prove that. But I tried to read that and try to find something in that during services, and I couldn't.
But you did find that matter is neither created or destroyed.
Our good friend, Rabbi Jonathan Case, came to the house the night that Isaac died. And he said that he's not gone. You know, he quoted the rules of dynamics. I think it's the rules of dynamics. The first one, matter is neither created nor destroyed. And he said his energy is still around. It will always be around. You know, and that gave us a little bit of hope. But my argument with God went on for a very long time and still goes on. In fact, at one point, and I write about it in the book, I was so angry that I challenged him to a fist fight.
Who won?
He didn't show up. I frankly think he knew that I had such righteous wrath that I would have won.
Yeah.
So Steven, you moved out and actually went kind of after the drug industry in a way, or people who are doing off-label things, right?
Well, what happened for me was after really a couple of years, and I'd like to comment on your religious comment. I have for years been a confirmed atheist. There's nothing afterward. There's nothing going on. And after my son's death, I converted to being an agnostic. In the sense that I don't know that much, and I'm arrogant if I'm being an atheist. So I don't really know what's out there, but I'm going to admit I don't know, because this was a real shocker for me.
Well, Rob, I just wanted you to mention, given talking about, you know, whether there's a God or just coincidence or what, tell us about the car garage door opener story in your book.
Oh my goodness! Well,
I was blown away.
Yeah. Well, my to-be wife, Linda, was going to move in, and that meant we needed a new garage door opener. We only had one, and I didn't know where it was from, but I had the name of the company on my garage door opener, and I didn't think anything more about it. That was at the beginning of the day, and I had a therapy appointment that afternoon, and it was a very emotional one. And I got into the car, and I felt Andrew's presence. And as he often did when he was alive, he put his hand on my hand on the gear shift. And I felt his presence, and I was just lost. And lost in feeling and in a daze, and I missed my turn. Normally, I would have taken the freeway back to work, and instead I took 8 Mile Road, which people will know from the movie. An 8 Mile Road is it's a surface road, but there are 4 lanes in each direction with a median in between, and it's fast. And I was in the left-hand lane to try and make the best time. And I pulled up at a light, and all of a sudden, Andrew was gone. And I was startled and sort of became aware of what was around me. And lo and behold, on the other side of the light, maybe 100 feet in front of me, was the company that marketed the garage door opener. Well, there were cars now 3 lanes to the right of me, and I assumed I wouldn't be able to get over in time safely. But I thought, well, I'll try. When the light changed, nobody moved. and I was able to move over 3 lanes and pull into the parking lot with no problem. And I went in and I said, I need another garage door opener like this one. And the person behind the desk said, just a minute. And from behind from inside the store, a man came out who was the owner of the store, who was the man who drove the car that killed Andrew.
Oh. Wow.
Wow.
And he wanted to apologize.
And he did not apologize. He was talking about how his life.
Oh, that's right.
His life was had gotten worse, and he was having trouble. He was facing divorce, and I just listened, and I got out and resolved that I would buy a new garage door opener and get something from somebody else, and it evoked my anger that before that I had not been able to touch.
So you were able to touch it. Yeah.
I just have one thought. I moved to New York about 5 years after Andrew died, and I started dating, and I started enjoying myself, and I started feeling terribly guilty. And I won't forget it. I was on 110th Street in Central Park, and there was this image of Andrew, my Andrew, and he said, "It's okay, you can enjoy yourself."
Wow, I love that.
I needed his permission. It was,
Yeah.
and I'm not the kind of guy who goes into
No.
this spooky
Yeah.
stuff. And it was that. And I was really agonizing over enjoying myself and starting a new life. So that was an important moment for me.
Neal, I know everybody here, and if we had time, I'd have you read from your books, because everybody had these moments towards the end where they're saying life is good again.
Right.
You want to comment on your life is good again?
Yeah, it's taken it took 10 years before we ever got there, but through a lot of thinking about it and frankly writing about it. You know, what I talk about is write your heart out
Yeah, I like that.
and do it honestly and openly and let it all flow. And by going back to the very beginning of that day and carrying it all the way through to the grief journey and then to starting to feel better, which was a very slow process, what I realized was that by talking it out through the Compassionate Friends, for example, which we joined, I was able to find a balance in life, because my analogy was that when my son died, it was as if a foot were ripped off, and I had to learn to balance on the remaining leg. And it just isn't easy to do that. You can keep your balance for a little while, but something will knock you over.
Yeah.
Okay, well, tell us how people get that book. Now you brought Balancing on One.
Well, you do it, I think, by being open and honest about it. If someone said to me, how do you feel, I would tell them.
Okay.
If someone asked me how many children you have, I always say 2, because Isaac is still my child even though he's gone.
Yeah.
By talking openly and freely about Isaac, by going to the Compassionate Friends, and again, as I said, by writing about it. I was able to study my own path, my own journey, and learn from that. And I have found that I can wake up in the morning and not have my very first thought be, my son is gone. And that was a big change.
Yeah.
You know, that was the start of it. I'm still balancing on one foot,
And how do people get your book, Balancing on One Foot?
standing on one foot.
I mean, standing on one foot.
Oh, that's easy. You go to www.standingononefoot.com, and if you put on TCF in the promo code, I will send you the book for free.
Whoa, okay.
Terrific.
There you go.
Yeah, the idea of making money off of my journey and Isaac's death struck me as something that I didn't want to do, and I want to give it away. We have 450 copies that I'm trying to give out to people so they can learn from it. I've had some really good response. One woman wrote to me and said that she stopped self-medicating after reading the book.
Oh, that's great.
Awesome.
So I feel good.
Good. How about you, Steven? How have you gotten to where you are today? And
How I got to where I am today. I think that leaving the area where Andrew died was a hugely important thing for me. I got away from the triggers. Secondly, I got angry. I got indignant. As I started reviewing the results of this medication and the history and the therapy and so on, I got angry. And so one of the first things I did, because I had to get a sense of myself again, I went back to some of the consulting work that I did and some of the clients, so I could get back to the Steve that I knew.
Yeah.
But then after a period of time, I said, I've got to write about this. I cannot let this go. And the book took 4 years, Overmedicated and Undertreated, and
has a lot of wonderful statistics, a wonderful
it's
thoughts,
really
wonderful
a
advice.
it's got footnotes, it's very scientific, it's recommended by Columbia University Department of Psychiatry, the New York Times. It's been covered in Dateline NBC, one episode in June. It's had a very good reception.
And it's scientific, but it's written in narrative form so that you get caught up in it and you want to keep reading to find out what happens next.
Yeah.
So I was educated, and yet I was also very caught up in your own personal story.
I wanted people to feel that, and get.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is, women can read it.
Yeah.
Most men cannot.
Oh, this is interesting.
That's interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, most men cannot. They don't get past the 3rd chapter. It's atypical for a man to be so honest, to be so candid, to show his feelings and his pain.
Yeah.
Now, how do we get your book?
Most people get it through Amazon and
Okay.
Kindle, and also my website, donoharmnetwork.org. You can click on the icon there and get the book that way.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
And Rob, how about you? How have you gotten to where you are today?
I think it's, well, in great part from support from friends and
Now, one thing I want to say about you is you really, I mean, you guys saw your kids die. I mean, there are people, like I didn't see my son die. I didn't see him at the hospital. He was, you know, he was gone. And you saw your son I didn't see him actually at the death site or anything. And you actually saw your son die. So
Yes.
a big trauma,
Oh, yes.
huge trauma. I mean, you talk about how he looked at the scene. I mean,
Yes.
you know, so it's a huge trauma, and you were talking about replaying it. How did you deal with that?
I talked about it in therapy. I wrote about it a lot.
Did you
and
have any rapid eye desensitization? Or
I
anything?
did. I had.
Wow.
I had.
You had EMDR.
I had EMDR and I had EFT, emotional freedom technique.
Oh.
And EMDR is extremely effective, and EFT I found even more effective.
Interesting.
And
And now say what those are again, because I think people should know about those when they've had an experience where they keep replaying it.
they are. I'm not sure I know how to describe them.
One of them
They-
is just eye tracking.
Yeah, it has to do with alternating right and left. It can be. It doesn't have to be eye tracking.
Yeah,
it can be legs. It can be any
Somehow
right,
the
left.
body, the brain can't reprocess it exactly the same
Right.
if there's another distraction.
And there is some reprogramming in essence, and it doesn't change the memory, but it changes the significance of it. EFT involves tapping actually what are acupuncture points.
So I think that's really important for
Yep.
people to know when they've had that kind of trauma. How do people get your book?
From Amazon, and they can also go to my website, dearandrew.net,
Okay.
and there is a link there to the Amazon site.
Okay, great. Well, thank you three guys for
Yes,
being on.
thank you
You're,
so
you're
much.
amazing, and I think you give people a lot of hope that they can be up and running and they can figure out ideas of how they can express themselves. Wonderful ideas. So thank you so much for being on the
Thank
show
you.
today.
Yes,
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
And thanks for watching this show today. And Heidi and I always want to remind you that if you've lost hope, please lean on ours till you find your own, and God bless.